Yes, I see that recording is turned on now. And I would like to invite Zinaida Bolea for her presentation, The Image of Villager in the Narration of the Deportees from Moldavian RSS.
SSR. Thank you, dear colleagues. Good afternoon. My name is Zinaida Bolea. I'm an associate professor at the Moldova State University, Department of Psychology. Also, I'm a candidate of the Romanian Society of Psychoanalysis. Today, I want to thank for the organizers for this seminar, and I want to thank my colleague Natalia Cujocaru, who invited me for participation in this seminar. My presentation is a part of a state program, Recovery and Historical Valorification of the Memory of Victims of totalitarian communist regime in Moldavian SSR. And it's also psychoanalytic perspective on the phenomena of deportation. I try to share the presentation. I hope you can see the presentation. You can say me.
Yes, we see.
You see the presentation?
Yes.
Thanks. The title of my presentation is The Image of the Villager in the Narration of the Deportees from Moldavian SSR. Social traumas such as deportations fall into the category of man-made disasters in which an individual or a group is subjected to trauma by the impact of other human individuals, this way overcoming the psychic resonance associated with natural or technical trauma. Kayes argued that in case of anthropogenic social traumas, the process of mooning is long and sometimes impossible, because social violence disturbs the human connections and comes with an additional suffering related to relationships. Bochleber mentions that the aim of the anthropogenic traumas is to annihilate the historical and social existence of a person, a central psychological consequence of this type of experience being the collapse of the empathy process, this way testing the social connection. The psychoanalytic perspective formulates important hypotheses regarding the mechanism of the individual's involvement as a traumatogenic character in the context of social traumas. In group psychology and the analysis of the ego, Freud mentioned about the idealization of the leader and his own group and the external projection of negative features. In Civilization and its discontents, Freud is firming his hypothesis about humans' tendency to aggression and considers it to be the main disruptive factor of relationships with people around us. An important role of civilization and culture being to limit instinctual impulses in order to maintain group cohesion. Melanie Klein continues the analysis of the psychic mechanisms that predispose to heterodestructivity, mentioning the role of envy and schizoparanoid mechanism at the beginning of psychic life. According to Klein's opinion, the first months of life are dominated by archaic schizoparanoid psychic mechanism characterized by communication through projective identification, splitting, idealization, devaluation, as well as a prevalence of persecutory anxiety, archaic forms of envy and rivalry. In the process of mental growth, the next position, more evolved, will be the depressive position in which the individual is able to contain aggressive impulses, whereas the prevalent anxiety is depressive, related to awareness of attachment to the other, or the possibility of losing the other as a result of one's aggressive movements. In the depressive position, the person is able to experience feelings of guilt, which stimulate the reparative gesture. Italian psychoanalyst Paolo Fonda extrapolates the Kleinian psychic positions, schizoparanoid and depressive, on the functioning of the group, suggesting that not only individuals but also groups move from one position to another, regressing to the schizoparanoid position every time they cannot maintain the depressive position due to internal vulnerabilities or external factors. The intensification of the schizoparanoid position will determine the creation of a common enemy, the devaluation and dehumanization of the enemy, and the idealization of one's own group. Psychoanalyst Sigal Fonda mentions about the low availability of the individual and of the group to recognize their own destructive tendencies, because this puts in contact with painful realities specific to the depressive position, awareness of their own destructiveness, grief of loss, guilt, consciousness of human condition. The psychoanalytic perspective reveals that the development and maintenance of a healthy relationship with others requires a continuous effort in maintaining the depressive position, moments of social-political chaos, updating and manipulating occurring feelings that are so difficult to manage. The accentuation of social animosity and the splitting of the community represent stratagems characteristic for totalitarian systems, including the communist repressive system. The deportation from the Moldavian SSR during 1940, 1941, 1944, 1953 were subjected by the same logistical schemes of splitting the community, especially by qualifying the deportees in the official argumentative discourse of repression as dangerous elements, once being called enemies of the nations, and at the same time including the villagers in the deportation teams. The objective of our research was the analysis of the image of the villager in the narration of deportees. Method of data analysis used was content analysis. The narrative materials was obtained and based on the 70 in-depth semi-structured interviews conducted by the Institute of Social History Pro Memoria within the stage program Recovery and Historical Valorification of the Memory of Victims of the Totalitarian Communist Regime of the Moldavian SSR during 1940, 1941, 1944, 1953. Following the analysis of the interviews conducted with the former deportees, we identify a differentiation in the group of deportees regarding the role of the villager in the context of deportations. We identified a category of deportees who attribute responsibility for deportations to the Stalinist repressive regime and less or not at all to individual or specific social categories. The communist regime is guilty of everything that happened. For another category of deportees, compatriots are associated with responsibility and guilt for deportation and are often the target for anger and hatred. Then why did they deport us? The pagans from the village wanted that. In the speech of the deportees, attitudes and actions of the villages perceive that relational traumas are related to lack of empathy and compassion for deportees, that one from the village didn't allow even to take a bread with us. Leave it, you don't need you. They will take you there to the white bears, and the bears will feed you. The white bears will eat you. The suffering derived from the betrayal from villagers' side. He ate with us, drank with us, but he didn't give up until he didn't take my father out of the house. Situations of gross manifestation of social envy. You deserve it. Now you will be poor too. It's important to mention the tendency towards generalization as a manifestation of mental splitting and a form of cognitive distortion through which negative traits are attributed to the whole nations, along with the idealization of other ethnicities or nations. Kazakh will never sell you, and look how the Moldavian treated us. Moldavians are envious. Thus, the trend identified in the interviews is a description of Moldavians as envious, evil traitors. We consider this tendency to generalization a consequence of their impulsivity to elaborate the trauma and a proof of a maintenance of splitting position in the interpretation of the social traumatic realities. When asked if they have forgiven those considered involved in the deportations, the deportees respond in a way that led us to use the expression resentful forgiveness. When we say resentful forgiveness, we differentiate deportees that send messages of forgiveness from their side as a human instance, but this forgiveness does not seem to be final, as most of them tend to appeal to another judge, fate, divinity, which will punish those who contributed to the repression. I forgive them, but God will punish them anyway, is a time of message that represents this attitude. Deportations represent a trauma in which a significant share has relational traumatization. We find in the context of deportations, as in other social traumas, the presence of the psychic mechanism of splitting through which the world is divided into good and bad. Through this categorical division of realities, splitting is involved in the social violence and allows the actualization and maintaining of schizophrenic mechanisms and of a primitive feeling of hatred, envy, rivalry, while at the same time impending the elaboration of trauma. We find that in the testimonies of the deportees, those responsible for the deportation are appointed Stalin, the Communist Party, and some villages. But the villages have a specific status in the psychic representation regarding the responsibility for deportation of the deportees. The village is often presented as a central character in deportation, being assigned with the intention and responsibility also by experiencing a range of post-traumatic reactions towards them: anger, hatred, disregard. In an attempt to provide pertinent assumptions for understanding this representation, we consider that the villager was the most accessible protagonist regarding deportation to which anger was directed, in contrast to the real perpetrators, at the same time inaccessible for the trauma elaboration procedure, Stalin and the communist repressive system. This interpretation of the result is related to the specifics of social anthropogenic traumas and the fact that overcoming social trauma involves certain conditions: recognition of guilt, repairing, demands for punishment, recognition of the representative of totalitarian system, of the collapse of their value system. Given the fact that the communist repressive system and its leaders were not subjected to a plenary trial and did not admit their guilt, the protagonist in relation to who is lived the most intense attitude of anger as natural reactions of a traumatized person remains the villager. Reflections on the relationship with the other are an important part of the manifestation of meaning, of the process of elaboration of trauma, and as the process of reconciliation. In our approach, we start from the premise that the lack of public official discussions about deportations have affected the entire population of the Republic of Moldova, both deportees and people involved in assisting the repressive system, as well as the rest of the population affected by Soviet propaganda in their ability to mentalize these social traumatic events. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Zinaida, for your presentation. Its perspective is different from other presentations, but still it can promote interesting discussion, I hope, after this part. And the discussion we will have after the second presentation of this part, which I welcome now. Presentation by Lavinia, Betea, and Vlad. I'm sorry, you will need to present your...
Cioaca, yeah. Vlad Cioaca is my name. Yes, I will make the presentation. I am trying to share the screen. Just a moment.
And the title of the presentation is Anomic Phenomena and Cognitive Biases in Government Policies to Stop the COVID-19 Pandemic in Romania.
Yes.
So, we have a sort of shift in time now.
Yes, I think it's okay.
From past to present, yes.
Yes, it's okay. Can you see?
We see your mailbox. At least I see your mailbox.
Why? Just a moment.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you need to open presentation on your computer before sharing.
I think that Zinaida needs to unshare the screen.
Yes,
Okay.
I think.
Just a moment. I can manage this screen. I don't know what I have done.
You should have a button on the top of your screen, the red one, or down on the screen.
I can see the entire screen. I have only a little screen on the computer.
Somewhere should be the button that says stop sharing the screen, something like that.
Yes,
usually
I know,
on top.
but I cannot have the entire screen.
Ольга, а мы можем как-то сделать так, чтобы Зинаида не могла делиться экраном?
Можем, конечно, я могу остановить.
А то у нас не получается это сделать.
Да, спасибо. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Vlad, we can see your presentation now.
Good. So my internet connection is not so stable today because of the weather, but I hope that we have no problems. Okay. Our presentation is called Anomic Phenomena and Cognitive Biases in Government Policies to Stop the COVID-19 Pandemic in Romania. In the introduction, we want to mention that after 10 months since the launch of COVID-19, in the context of the current development of communication technologies, we appreciate as immeasurable the amount of information and opinions on the evolution and symptoms of the pandemic or of political and governmental projects and strategies to stop it. We will therefore try to review in the following some of their psychosociological effects. From the previous experiences of human communities that went through the tragedy of Black Plague or Spanish flu, disturbing mnemonic traces have been preserved. The societies that faced the mentioned diseases had to face states of imbalance and institutional disorder recorded by the testimonies of the time and sociologically explainable by the concept of anomie launched by the French sociologist Émile Durkheim in the late 19th century to designate a weakening of the collective consciousness against the background of the destabilization of the old normative regime in the absence of the coherence and internalization of a new one. But can we talk about anomie in the current pandemic? The answer to this question would be a first objective of this theoretical study. The second objective aims to identify, with the help of some ordering concepts and theories, some of the most common cognitive biases in the representation of government policies to stop the COVID-19 pandemic in Romania. In the operationalization of the anomic phenomenon associated with the pandemic, we consider three dimensions. One, the pandemic has generated major, unpredictable, and unscheduled social changes which have called into question socialized and traditionally established models of relationship. The pandemic imposed untimely changes in the social relations system with strong reverberation in the plan of daily life. The depth of the changes and the persistence of this disruptive factor did not allow the structuring and internalization of the new regime of functioning of the society. This paints the typical defining image of the anomic society. Robert Merton attributes new meanings to social anomie, which he links to the discrepancy between socially desirable goals and the means that society makes available to achieve them, respectively the goals and means of each individual. In a pandemic context, the social goal is to reduce the spread of the virus. The legitimate means put in the service of the social goal are governmental measures. As these measures are restrictive, coercive, and contradict other personal goals, the rebels in the Merton classification end up ahead of the conformists. Exploratory discussions demonstrate the recurrence of reasoning such as, I don't wear a mask because I can't breathe properly, or I can't stay in isolation for 2 weeks. I have important issues to solve, so I'll go out and hope I won't be caught. Or it doesn't matter if it's crowded. It's more important for me to participate in the religious ritual, and so on. The state becomes incapable of ensuring control against the background of the generalist rebellion. This inability is illustrated by the closure of markets. After imposing the wearing of masks in the agri-food markets and finding that the measure was simply ignored by both customers and sellers, officials resorted to intensify controls without success. It is even acknowledged by the Prime Minister of Romania, Ludovic Orban, according to whom the repeated controls did not lead to a result because the degree of compliance did not increase. It has therefore resorted to the total closure of agri-markets and thus to recognition of the state's inability to ensure compliance with the new rules not yet internalized by citizens. Anomic phenomena are closely related to cognitive biases. From a psychosociological perspective, by cognitive biases, we designate an extensive category of concepts and judgments that exaggerate the pros or cons of something, phenomenon, behavior, individual, group, in an incorrect and or unfair way. Theories and explications of the genesis, evolution, and management of pandemics also bear their imprint. Causal explications are implicitly attributed to aspects, phenomena, and events perceived through the senses. For causal patterns naturally dominate our thinking, the phenomenon being designated as a process of attribution. We attribute a more or less appropriate cause of a perceived effect. How many individuals are prepared and willing to imagine this process unfolding in the cellular micro-universe, an object more difficult to represent than the macro-universe of celestial bodies? It is understood that most contemporaries of previous pandemics have attributed causes of the order of divinity or occult forces. There are many contemporaries who think the same way. The consistent arguments in this regard come from the media. Romanian television news programs have constantly presented Orthodox ceremonies, Saturday services, pilgrimages, where crowds refuse to abide by government decisions, wearing a mask and respecting social distance, on the grounds that God's protection is more effective than all. Orthodox Church leaders have publicly argued against the authorities' regulations with the argument that the virus cannot be transmitted through substances or objects of worship. We can see here
Vlad, there is no sound.
Now what's happening?
Vlad, we can't hear you.
He told he has bad internet connections today.
Did you ask me to turn on the?
That is the shortcoming of
No, questa è, no, questa era di già. Okay.
yes, there are special issues which we have in Zoom, and one of those issues is technical problems. We depend on internet, and I think that internet connection of Vlad was broken.
Ma questo a chi serve? Allora, decidiamoci. Tra euro e cifra mettiamo lo spazio o non ce lo mettiamo? Se non ce lo mettiamo, vediamo tutto.
Alessandra, could you switch off your sound?
Yeah, sorry. For some reason, it happened. It arrived to me a request to turn on my sound, and I thought it was by you, and that you should have asked me something. Sorry, my bad.
That is fine. What I would suggest to do, maybe Vlad will manage his connection, and he will be able to finish his presentation. And for all of us, it will be good to have a half an hour of free time to eat something. What do you think about that? And after this lunch time, we can meet again. Maybe Vlad will finish his presentation and we will have discussion. If it is fine, we can meet in half an hour.
We should leave a message to him, because if he come back and he doesn't find anybody, he doesn't know our plan.
I will stay here and I will write in a message. Thank you, Anna Maria.
Okay.
Thank you.
So in half an hour.
Half an hour.
See you soon.